Midnight wasn't supposed to bring love. But then, my neighbor knocked. The night was quiet in that way only past midnight can be. A stillness that makes every sound feel louder, sharper, more personal. My apartment was dimly lit, the warm glow of a single lamp pooling across my desk as I scrolled absent-mindedly through an unfinished book. Rain tapped against the window, steady and soft, like a heartbeat I didn't know I'd been listening to. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was almost hesitant, 3 quick raps, followed by silence so complete it felt like it pressed against my chest. My first thought was that I imagined it. Nobody knocked on doors at this hour. My second thought, what if something was wrong? When I opened the door, the cold night air rushed in like a whisper. And there she was. My neighbor stood barefoot on the mat, hair slightly damp from the drizzle, wrapped in a loose cardigan she'd clearly thrown on in a hurry. Her breath fogged softly in the night air. Her face wasn't panicked. Exactly. More like someone who'd spent too long holding everything together and finally ran out of quiet ways to cope. "Hi," she said, voice low, controlled, but with the faintest tremor underneath. "I'm sorry. I wouldn't be here this late if it wasn't important." For a moment I just stared. She'd always seemed untouchable. The elegant woman next door who moved through the world like someone who didn't need anyone. But under the dim porch light, at 12:17 a.m., she didn't look untouchable. She looked real. I stepped aside instinctively. "Of course. Come in." She hesitated on the threshold, hugging the cardigan tighter around herself as though it were armor. Then she crossed over, bringing with her the scent of rain and faint citrus, something soft and quietly expensive. The sound of the door closing behind her made the world outside disappear, leaving only the two of us in the warm silence of my hallway. Up close, I noticed the details I'd never allowed myself to before. The silver strands threaded gently through her hair, the fine lines around her mouth, the way her shoulders carried a weight she tried to hide. She wasn't trembling, but there was a kind of contained urgency in the way she moved, like someone holding back the flood just enough to stay composed. She exhaled slowly. "I didn't know who else to go to." I nodded, not asking questions yet. The night didn't need answers right away. It just needed room to breathe. The rain outside deepened, a gentle percussion against the walls. I led her toward the warm light of the living room, my heart beat louder than it should have been. She was just my neighbor, someone I'd nodded to in hallways, exchanged polite greetings with on quiet mornings. But something about the way she stood there, barefoot and brave in the soft shadows, felt like a door opening that neither of us had expected. And maybe, if I'm honest, a part of me hoped it wouldn't close again. The first thing I noticed when we stepped into the living room was how quiet everything became. The storm outside faded into a soft rhythm, and the warm yellow light from the floor lamp wrapped around us like a blanket. It wasn't bright, just enough to soften the edges of the night and make the room feel smaller, closer, safer. She stood just inside the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, cardigan clutched tight. The dampness from the rain had kissed her hair into loose waves, strands falling gently along her neck. There was a kind of poised awkwardness in her stance, the look of someone who wasn't used to asking for help but had finally been forced to. I moved toward the kitchen without asking too many questions. Midnight emergencies don't always need immediate explanations. Sometimes they just need warmth. "Tea?" I asked over my shoulder. She gave a soft laugh. It wasn't a laugh of amusement, more of release. "At midnight," I smiled faintly. "It's the best time for it." While the kettle began its quiet rumble, she slowly sat down on the couch. Not at the corner, but right in the middle, as though unsure whether to stay or leave. Her legs were tucked to one side, bare feet resting against the fabric. She kept glancing at the window, listening to the rain, then back at me, as if reminding herself this wasn't a dream. I set a steaming mug on the table in front of her, the faint curl of mint-scented steam rising into the still air. "Here," I said softly. "Thank you," she whispered, fingers curling around the cup like she was borrowing its warmth. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the hum of the rain, the soft whistle of the heater, and the delicate clink of her spoon against the ceramic. But there was something calming about it. No pressure, no performance, just two people awake when the world slept. Finally, she let out a quiet breath. "I'm sorry for showing up like this. You don't have to apologize," I said, and I meant it. She gave a small, tired smile. "The power's out in my place. The roof's leaking again. I tried to handle it, but—" She paused, eyes dropping to the cup. "I just didn't want to be alone tonight." Her voice cracked slightly at the end. Just a fracture, but enough to make the moment real. The way she looked down, eyelashes fluttering against damp cheeks, wasn't practiced vulnerability. It was something raw, something she didn't mean to let me see. I leaned back in the chair across from her, letting the silence hold us. Sometimes the best way to make someone feel safe isn't to fix their problem, but to make sure they're not alone in it. The light from the lamp caught the fine lines near her eyes, the gentle arch of her shoulders, the soft rise and fall of her breath. She looked both fragile and strong at once, like someone who had spent years being the one who carried everything, and finally needed someone to simply listen. She lifted her eyes to me then, a quiet, steady gaze, not searching for solutions, just seeing me. For a moment, the night didn't feel like midnight anymore. It felt like a pause in the world, a fragile kind of closeness wrapped in the glow of one soft lamp. The tea between us had long gone warm, but neither of us seemed in a hurry to move. The storm outside had settled into a soft, steady rhythm, the kind of rain that didn't demand attention but wrapped the world in a quiet hush. My living room had never felt this alive, or this still. She was curled slightly on the couch now, one leg folded under the other, cardigan draped loosely over her shoulders. The tension that clung to her when she'd first arrived had thinned a little, like fog lifting after dawn. Her breathing had slowed. Her shoulders didn't look quite as guarded. I was sitting across from her, elbows resting on my knees, mug in hand. I wasn't sure how we'd gone from two neighbors sharing tea to something that felt so close. Not romantic, not yet. Just human. The kind of closeness that doesn't need to be defined, only felt. She tilted her head slightly, eyes fixed on the window. "Do you ever notice how nights feel heavier than days?" she said softly. Her voice had changed, no longer polite and controlled, but lower, almost thoughtful. I didn't rush to answer. She didn't sound like someone looking for advice. She sounded like someone finally letting the air out of a long-held breath. She went on. "It's like everything I managed to keep buried during the day just gets louder at night." Her fingers traced the rim of the mug slowly. She wasn't looking at me, and I knew better than to interrupt someone trying to find the right words. "It's not just the roof leaking," she added with a humorless little laugh. "It's me. Everything. This house gets too quiet sometimes." She looked up then, meeting my gaze fully for the first time since she walked in. Her eyes were steady, but beneath that steadiness was a weight, a softness she had spent too long hiding. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something deeper. "I'm not very good at this," she admitted. "Needing people." I leaned back slowly, letting her words settle in the space between us. I wasn't sure why it mattered so much, but it did. The way she said it, like someone peeling back a layer without knowing what might be underneath. "I get it," I said quietly. A small smile flickered at the corner of her mouth, brief but real. She shifted closer without even seeming to notice, the couch creaking softly beneath her. The room felt smaller, warmer. Her hair slipped over her shoulder as she leaned forward slightly, and I caught the faint scent of rain still lingering on her skin. The lamp light traced soft golden edges along her profile. For a moment, I forgot that we were neighbors, that this was supposed to be ordinary. Her hand brushed mine as she set the mug down on the table. It was a light touch, accidental probably, but it felt electric in the quiet. A single heartbeat stretched long. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not for the tea, not for the couch, but for something quieter, something between the lines." I nodded. "You don't have to carry everything alone." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence said everything. The storm outside kept on, soft and constant. And in that warm living room, with the world hushed around us, something between us shifted, gently, like the turning of a page. The rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it had deepened into a steady downpour, the kind of rain that makes the world outside feel far away, like a place you don't need to return to just yet. The clock on the wall ticked softly in the background, its hands sliding toward 2 a.m. The hours had passed unnoticed, wrapped up in the quiet comfort of shared space. She sat curled into the couch now, cardigan slipping off one shoulder, her bare feet tucked beneath her. There was a softness in her posture I hadn't seen before, like someone finally letting go of the invisible armor they wear all day. She glanced toward the dark window and sighed. "It's still pouring," she murmured. I followed her gaze. The streetlights outside were haloed by rain, everything slick and glistening like the world was holding its breath. Her apartment was just next door, but it might as well have been another city. The night had wrapped its arms around us, and neither of us seemed eager to let it go. "You don't have to go back yet," I said gently. She turned toward me, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Not because she didn't want to stay, but because admitting it might mean something. "I don't want to," she said softly, and the honesty in that simple line hit deeper than I expected. I nodded, offering a quiet smile. "Then don't." I fetched a blanket from the armchair, one I usually kept folded at the foot of my bed. She watched me with a half-smile, small, unsure, but real. When I draped it over her shoulders, her fingers brushed mine. It was nothing, just skin against skin for half a second, but it was enough to make the air between us shift again, a gentle tightening neither of us commented on. She leaned back into the couch, letting out a long breath that sounded a lot like relief. I can't remember the last time I just stopped, sat like this. I sat across from her again, hands folded loosely in my lap. "You should. You deserve to." Her laugh was quiet, warm, a little disbelieving. "I don't even know why I'm telling you all this. We barely know each other." I smiled. "Maybe that's why." For a moment, the only sound was the rain hitting the window. She shifted slightly, the blanket slipping down her arm, and she pulled it back up with small, unhurried movements. There was a kind of gentle elegance to her, even in this quiet, vulnerable state. "I always thought nights like this only existed in movies," she said softly, her voice a little distant. "You know, where someone shows up and everything feels a little less heavy." I met her eyes then, really met them, and saw something warm, almost glowing behind the tiredness. "Sometimes," I said, "the movies get it right." She held my gaze for a heartbeat too long. The weight of the night, the warmth of the lamp, the rain outside, everything seemed to fold inward around us. She wasn't just the woman next door anymore. She was here in my living room, in a moment that didn't feel accidental. She pulled the blanket closer and let out a quiet sigh. "Maybe I'll stay a little longer." And just like that, something subtle but undeniable settled in the room. Not a storm, not a confession, just a quiet gravity pulling us closer without words. By the time the clock brushed past 3 a.m., the world had disappeared beyond the windows. Rain still fell steadily, wrapping the neighborhood in a hush so complete it felt like we were the only two people awake. The warm light of the floor lamp cast soft amber across her face, catching the fine lines at the corner of her mouth when she smiled, the silver strands of her hair, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. She sat tucked into the far corner of the couch, blanket draped loosely over her lap. Her knees were drawn close, cardigan slipping off one shoulder. She wasn't guarded anymore. She was settled. The way she exhaled slowly, how her hands moved without their earlier tension, told me she wasn't just staying because of the storm anymore. "I should probably go back soon," she said quietly, but there wasn't conviction in her voice, only habit. "Probably," I replied, matching her softness. "But the rain disagrees." She smiled at that, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes, crinkling gently at the corners. "Yeah," she whispered. "The rain always has its way." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It wasn't heavy. It was the kind that holds something fragile, something new. She adjusted the blanket, and without really thinking, I moved to sit beside her. Not too close, but close enough that the warmth of her body touched the edge of mine. She didn't pull away. She didn't shift. She just breathed a little deeper, like the space between us made sense. A small shiver ran through her as the wind pressed against the windows. I reached for the blanket to pull it a little higher over her shoulders, and in that small, quiet moment, our hands met underneath. It was the lightest touch, skin against skin, fingers brushing softly, but it felt louder than the rain outside. Her breath caught, barely audible. She didn't move. Neither did I. For a second, the entire world seemed to hang on that point of contact. Her skin was cool, mine warm. Her fingers twitched, not to pull away, but to stay. When she finally lifted her eyes to meet mine, there was something unguarded in them. No practiced politeness, no distance, just a raw, searching quiet. She didn't need to speak, and neither did I. The question was already there between us, in the closeness of our hands, the weight of the night. I could smell the faint scent of her perfume again, soft citrus and rain. Her hair fell loosely around her face now, strands catching the warm light. She looked different than the woman I'd passed in the hallway for months. Or maybe she'd always been like this, and it was me who hadn't looked closely enough before. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not for the blanket, not for the tea, not even for staying. For being here." I squeezed her hand gently in response, just enough to let her know she wasn't alone in whatever this moment was. She didn't let go. The rain whispered steadily outside. Her fingers stayed entwined with mine, not tightly, just softly, as though acknowledging something fragile but real. And in that quiet, I realized how sometimes the most powerful moments don't come with grand gestures or loud declarations. They come with a single brush of a hand at 3 a.m., in a room lit by one soft lamp, with someone who makes the silence feel safe. The night had grown even quieter, the rain softening into a delicate drizzle. It was that strange hour when time felt stretched, suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. The small pool of warm lamplight wrapped around us like a cocoon, and everything beyond it faded into a gentle blur. We were still sitting close, closer than before. Our hands, almost unconsciously, were still lightly touching beneath the blanket. Not gripping, just resting, like both of us were afraid to shift and break whatever delicate thread had formed between us. She leaned her head back against the couch, exhaling softly. Her hair, damp from the earlier downpour, had loosened around her face. There was no trace of the composed neighbor who had knocked at my door hours earlier, just her, real and unguarded. "You know," she murmured, voice low, "I didn't plan on this." I looked at her. "On what?" She gave a small, nervous laugh, the kind that tries to hide sincerity but can't. "On sitting here at 3 in the morning with you, feeling like the world outside doesn't even exist." Her words hung between us, fragile and brave. She wasn't saying it as a joke. She was letting it out, a quiet truth. "I didn't expect it either," I admitted. My voice came out softer than I intended. "I thought you'd just need a flashlight or something." That made her smile, just a hint. She shook her head. "It's strange. I've lived across from you for years. I've said hi. I've passed you in the hallway. But this feels like the first time I'm actually meeting you." The honesty in her tone caught me off guard, but in a good way. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It was real. Outside, the rain tapped gently on the window, a quiet rhythm to our stillness. I shifted slightly, turning to face her more fully. Her knees were drawn up under the blanket, and she rested her chin on them, looking both strong and unexpectedly tender. "There's something about you," she continued, her eyes flicking down briefly before meeting mine again. "You look at people like you actually see them, and that's rare." Her words settled somewhere deep in me. For a long second, I didn't know how to respond. But I could feel it too, that pull between us, slow and steady, built not on impulse but on something quieter. I reached out, this time not by accident. My fingers brushed a strand of damp hair away from her face. She didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed on me, steady but uncertain, like someone both wanting and fearing to step closer to a line they never thought they'd cross. Her breath caught the slightest sound. "You shouldn't be this easy to talk to," she whispered half to herself. "Maybe it's just the rain," I whispered back. She smiled, but her eyes shimmered with something deeper. Vulnerability, hesitation, quiet desire. The space between us wasn't just physical anymore. It was heavy with everything unspoken. And then she said, almost inaudibly, "I didn't expect to feel this." The way she said this wasn't dramatic. It was raw, honest, like a truth she had been resisting all night finally slipped through the cracks. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, I let my hand rest softly against hers again. Not pushing, not claiming, just being there. The clock ticked softly. The rain whispered. And for the first time, neither of us was hiding from what was happening between us. We were simply in it, quiet, steady, real. The storm had finally exhausted itself. The rain tapered into a soft drizzle, like a whisper fading into silence. Beyond the window, the streetlights glimmered in small puddles, and the world outside looked freshly washed, quiet, fragile, still. Inside, we hadn't moved much. Our hands were still lightly touching under the now warm blanket. It wasn't the same touch as before, hesitant, accidental. It had changed. It meant something now. She shifted slightly, pulling her legs down from the couch, and turned her body toward me. The lamplight caught the side of her face, warm against her skin. She wasn't guarded anymore, just quiet, thoughtful. "I should go," she whispered. It wasn't an excuse this time. It was a truth wrapped in something softer. "Yeah," I said gently, but neither of us moved. For a moment, the silence between us was a living thing. Not heavy, not empty, just full of everything we hadn't said. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, looking down at our hands. "I don't usually do this," she said slowly. "I don't stay. I don't let things happen like this." I nodded. "Me neither." She laughed softly at that, the kind of laugh that carried both warmth and a little disbelief. "Of course you don't. You're—" She stopped herself, shaking her head with a half-smile. "I'm what?" I asked. "You're young," she said, almost apologetically. But the way her eyes lingered on me wasn't dismissive. It was cautious, protective, herself fighting her own hesitation. I didn't say anything for a second. Instead, I gently turned my hand over, threading my fingers with hers more deliberately this time. The touch was steady, grounded. "I don't think this is about age," I said softly. "I think it's about how it feels right now." Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and something in them softened. Not melted, not surrendered, but opened. She exhaled slowly, as if letting go of a wall she'd carried for too long. "You make it sound simple," she murmured. "It doesn't have to be complicated," I replied. "It can just be real." The words weren't rehearsed. They came out like a quiet promise I didn't fully understand myself but meant all the same. She studied my face for a long moment. Not the way someone looks when they're searching for flaws, but the way someone looks when they're trying to trust what they feel. Then she reached out with her free hand, brushed her fingers against my cheek. Soft, slow, deliberate. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It was more intimate than that. A small, quiet smile curved at her lips. "Whatever this is," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's real. That's enough." My chest tightened, not with fear, but something warm, something steady. I leaned forward just slightly, and she didn't pull away. Our foreheads touched, a small, quiet meeting point. We stayed there for a heartbeat too long. Not a kiss, not a confession, just being close. When she finally stood, she didn't rush to the door. She turned back, barefoot against the wooden floor, rain still glistening on her jacket. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night," I answered. The door closed softly behind her, but the silence she left behind wasn't empty. It lingered, like the warmth of her hand in mine, like the soft echo of rain after a storm. We hadn't made promises. We hadn't defined anything. But what happened tonight was real, quiet, fragile, and alive. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. The storm had finally exhausted itself. The rain tapered into a soft drizzle, like a whisper fading into silence. Beyond the window, the streetlights glimmered in small puddles, and the world outside looked freshly washed, quiet, fragile, still. Inside, we hadn't moved much. Our hands were still lightly touching under the now warm blanket. It wasn't the same touch as before, hesitant, accidental. It had changed. It meant something now. She shifted slightly, pulling her legs down from the couch, and turned her body toward me. The lamplight caught the side of her face, warm against her skin. She wasn't guarded anymore, just quiet, thoughtful. "I should go," she whispered. It wasn't an excuse this time. It was a truth wrapped in something softer. "Yeah," I said gently, but neither of us moved. For a moment, the silence between us was a living thing. Not heavy, not empty, just full of everything we hadn't said. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, looking down at our hands. "I don't usually do this," she said slowly. "I don't stay. I don't let things happen like this." I nodded. "Me neither." She laughed softly at that, the kind of laugh that carried both warmth and a little disbelief. "Of course you don't. You're—" She stopped herself, shaking her head with a half-smile. "I'm what?" I asked. "You're young," she said, almost apologetically. But the way her eyes lingered on me wasn't dismissive. It was cautious, protective, herself fighting her own hesitation. I didn't say anything for a second. Instead, I gently turned my hand over, threading my fingers with hers more deliberately this time. The touch was steady, grounded. "I don't think this is about age," I said softly. "I think it's about how it feels right now." Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and something in them softened. Not melted, not surrendered, but opened. She exhaled slowly, as if letting go of a wall she'd carried for too long. "You make it sound simple," she murmured. "It doesn't have to be complicated," I replied. "It can just be real." The words weren't rehearsed. They came out like a quiet promise I didn't fully understand myself but meant all the same. She studied my face for a long moment. Not the way someone looks when they're searching for flaws, but the way someone looks when they're trying to trust what they feel. Then she reached out with her free hand, brushed her fingers against my cheek. Soft, slow, deliberate. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It was more intimate than that. A small, quiet smile curved at her lips. "Whatever this is," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's real. That's enough." My chest tightened, not with fear, but something warm, something steady. I leaned forward just slightly, and she didn't pull away. Our foreheads touched, a small, quiet meeting point. We stayed there for a heartbeat too long. Not a kiss, not a confession, just being close. When she finally stood, she didn't rush to the door. She turned back, barefoot against the wooden floor, rain still glistening on her jacket. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night," I answered. The door closed softly behind her, but the silence she left behind wasn't empty. It lingered, like the warmth of her hand in mine, like the soft echo of rain after a storm.